Alright everybody, welcome back to the channel. It's Matt here from Chill TCG. So the Chill Series 11 wrapped up just this past week. Sponsored by Atlas Collectibles, was a great tournament, had a great turnout, about 170 players. But I want to touch on the deck that actually won this tournament. Might surprise you guys a little bit, but this deck archetype and this card specifically has been winning tournaments all over the place recently. And I think it's only fitting that we make a video on the list that won our Chill Series tournament. Now I got the Limitless page up right here if you guys want to take a look at it. And you'll notice that the winning deck here with from Caquim was actually Decidueye. Now, Decidueye Goons is an archetype that a lot of people know, but recently I believe it was Danny Altavilla and Robin from Limitless. I believe it was those two. I know it was Robin. Robin was one of the people, but they sort of created this straight Decidueye list recently, and I think it was like the day of or the day before this tournament happened last week. Caquim was like, you know what, I'll just play this deck, we'll see how it goes. Ended up being one of the best meta calls that he possibly could have done for this tournament, and it was an absolutely incredible run on his part. Pretty much, you know, swept through Swiss, swept through Top Cut, and just had an absolutely dominating run with this Decidueye list. People just really haven't been respecting Decidueye recently. It's just, you know, been placing really well in tournaments. Realistically, we have some cards in a lot of deck archetypes that you can tech in that are going to really help you with this matchup, but it just doesn't seem like, you know, people are really respecting Decidueye and people aren't really preparing for it, and they're paying for it in bracket for sure. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at Caquim's list. First and foremost, though, I just want to, you know, go ahead and point out his run before we go in and take a look at the list a little bit further. He won, well, what is it? 10 games in the tournament and only lost one. He ended up IDing one game in Swiss against Luke Metal, but his only loss was the first game of the tournament, which was against Blacephalon. Kobe there at the bottom, but after that, didn't lose a single game in the entire tournament. If we see, though, he played things like ADP, played ADP twice, and then ID'd once against Luke Metal. So realistically, you know, all of these other decks that he played, things like, you know, Lightning Mewtwo, Eternatus, Colossal, those are all decks that really don't often include anything in that deck to counter something like Decidueye. And because of that, and because of all of those decks being really popular in this tournament, Caquim just really was able to dominate those decks. And we'll get into that in a little bit when we look at the deck list. But this was the run. So, you know, in Swiss, he did beat, you know, some notable things like Control here, beat a couple E-turns, beat an ADP, Lightning Mewtwo. Again, all decks that really often don't tech in stuff for Decidueye. When you have things like ADP, you can put an Aegislash-V in that deck, which I think was really going to benefit you. Especially with ADP boost, you're one-shotting Decidueye. He's just not going to be able to, like, knock you out for, like, you know, 3 or 4 attacks, I don't think. So Aegislash is definitely a really good inclusion for sure in that list, especially now that Decidueye is such a good deck and has been winning so much recently. Hopefully people begin to respect it a little bit more. But if we go ahead and we look at like top 16, he played 4 games. First one against Colossal. Now Colossal really isn't going to be running anything. It's running like Oranguru. Might be running, well, yeah, I mean, you have like Oranguru, you might have like Jirachi, but none of those cards are really going to be really viable as attackers, as attacking options, especially against Decidueye. Colossal, of course, can't do anything against Decidueye, so that seems to be like a pretty easy win. And he actually beat 2 Eternatus, so I guess we can just take a look. So this first one, Eddie here, he was running 1 Hoopa and 1 Yveltal, so a couple single prize attackers in his deck that can attack on Decidueye, but, you know, both of those cards really, I guess, just weren't enough. Plus that Hoopa from Darkness Blaze is weak to grass anyway, gets one-shotted by Decidueye, so, you know, this deck just really doesn't have what it takes to counter Decidueye for sure. And I guess we can take a look at Lucas's list here, who has a very similar list, except for the Sableye V thrown in, which again is not going to be able to do any damage against Decidueye. And just with the 1 Hoopa and the Yveltal, just really not enough to counter Decidueye when it comes down to it. They're good inclusions in Eternatus. I'm not knocking him for running those cards, but decks like that, they just don't really prepare against Decidueye. You know, they're not really putting any cards in the deck specifically for that matchup, and because of that, you know, they have a really tough time, and it's almost an auto lose against a consistent Decidueye list, which we saw here from Caquim. This was his run in the tournament. I'm going to go ahead and we can go and take a look at his list specifically. Okay, there we go. So here's the list that he was running. Caquim, again, this list I think was originated by Robin and I think Danny, but I'm not sure if it was Danny. I think it was. But anyway, shout out to Danny. But anyway, this Decidueye list is running straight Decidueye. You'll notice that most Decidueye decks run like Obstagoon as well, which is another good card that goes really well with Decidueye. But this list, gets rid of Obstagoon and kind of makes the list a bit more consistent overall to get into those Decidueyes. Of course, we have a 4-4 lineup between Rowlet and Decidueye, and we've got the 4 Snorlaxes. So Snorlax, new card from Vivid Voltage, just really good sort of as a draw support Pokemon to end your turn. The ability, you just get to, draw cards until you have 7 in your hand, and then your turn ends. So it's a really good card to end your turn on, especially early game, maybe on your first or second turn. And he runs 4 Snorlaxes, so definitely a card that you consistently want to have right out there. Especially like you can afford to have a couple Snorlaxes get knocked out because they're only worth 1 prize card, and all the other cards in your deck are worth 1 prize as well. So the idea here is that you're in your turn for the first few turns or so with Snorlax. Make sure that you can get all those cards that you need to set up your Decidueyes, and then just go ahead and get your immunities out, and make sure that your opponent really can't do anything for the rest of the game, and you can slowly start chipping away with the Decidueye. We ran 4 Rowlets. This is the one from Cosmic Eclipse. This was sort of a one that people kind of prefer, the one with Skill Dive. I mean, you can run really any Rowlet. I'm not really sure if the whatever Rowlet you're running is going to be that important in the deck specifically, but it is important to note that he is running the one from Cosmic Eclipse. I think the Skill Dive one overall is a bit better, but at the same time, if you want to run the other Rowlet, I'm sure you can. Of course, two Dartrix. We don't need 4 Dartrix and 4 Decidueye because we are running Rare Candies, so that is going to be probably the more viable way to go into your Decidueyes. But of course, sometimes you don't have access to it, and it's better to just sort of get your each stage of your evolution on the board and manually evolve if you can, right? So 2 Dartrix, and then of course 4 Decidueye. For people that don't know Decidueye, it's a really good card, specifically for its ability. So it's got 140 HP, retreat cost of 2, but its ability there, Deep Force Camo, so it prevents all damage done to this Pokemon from your opponent's Pokemon V or GX Pokemon. So really any Pokemon that's not a single prize Pokemon isn't going to be able to even do any damage to Decidueye, effectively, completely nullifying entire decks. Things like ADP, things like Colossal, things like Eternatus. Pretty much those decks are based around two or 3 prize Pokemon to attack, and if they're not running single prize attackers, or they're not running things like Aegislash, which attack nullifies all abilities, then Decidueye has a really easy time just dominating that matchup. Its attack's actually not bad at all. So for a grass and a colorless, the colorless is pretty important too for this deck. Splitting Arrow does 90 damage, and then 2 to 2 of your opponent's bench Pokemon. Actually, a really decent attack, actually, especially with things like Telescopic Sight, which we'll take a look at in a bit. But that's sort of the the idea behind this deck. You get a couple Decidueyes on the board, and nothing else, and your opponent really just can't do anything, and you have some other aspects of the deck that make it so you can't really deck out, and eventually you kind of just soft lock your opponent into not being able to damage you or really sort of progress in the matchup. So Decidueye can be very powerful. He runs 2 Mimikyu in this list. Mimikyu, of course, is really good to shut down things like Mewtwo and Mew GX. Really any other GX attack or GX Pokemon that has an ability, maybe like Oricorio, that has any damage counters on it. And Decidueye spreads damage with its attack, so Mimikyu is a very good inclusion in this deck. I like it a lot personally. I think it's a really good matchup. It's a really good card to put in this deck for various matchups. And lastly, we have 1 Phione. So Phione's really good to make sure that you literally can never deck out. You just discard it or you don't discard it, but when it's on your bench, you can use its ability, Whirlpool Suction. You make your opponent switch out into one of their bench Pokemon, and then you put this card on the bottom of your deck. This means that, even if this is the last card in your deck, you're going to draw it every turn, play it, use its ability, put it back on the bottom of your deck. So pretty much you can never deck out unless for some reason they make it so you discard this card at whatever point, which I guess can happen. But realistically, you're always going to have Phione, in your deck, and you're always going to be able to put it back in your deck. Effectively making it so you're never going to deck out, which is always a good thing to have in a deck like this, which games might go on for a very long time. That's it for the Pokemon. We run 17 Pokemon. Again, the majority are these Decidueyes, Snorlaxes, all consistency reasons, which is, I think, a big reason why this deck did really well. Next up, we have Ordinary Rod. Ordinary Rod is really good for a lot of decks that run, like, a bunch of, single prize Pokemon or stage 2 Pokemon. A lot of times, you're just discarding cards throughout your game, or even if something gets knocked out, it's always good to put those cards back into your deck and reuse them right as the game goes on. Maybe you prized a couple Decidueye and one gets knocked out, you want to get one back. Plenty of different circumstances. Ordinary Rod's going to be really good. You can also take basic energy cards back from your discard pile, which is also really, really useful. So Ordinary Rod is a really good inclusion in this deck for sure. Next up for Pokemon Search, we have plenty of Pokemon Search, which is important for this deck with all of the different Pokemon that we have, and some Pokemon being, of course, really useful, and Decidueye being a Stage 2 Pokemon. 3 Pokemon Communication. We have 4 Quick Balls to find our basics, and then we also have 4 Turffield Stadiums just to search out any Evolution Grass Pokemon, which is either going to be your Dartrix or your Decidueye. So 4 Turffield Stadium, really good for consistency reasons to get your Decidueyes, the majority of the time when you need them for sure. Definitely a really good card. Goes really well. All of these cards go really well with Rosa, which you can find. We'll talk about Rosa in a bit. For supporters, we run 1 boss. It just makes sense. Every deck ever in the world is going to have at least 1 boss's order, so why win this deck? Not something you're necessarily always going to need, but a lot of times you're going to want to gust into that 1 or 2 single prize Pokemon that your opponent's running. Get that Pokemon knocked out early, and make sure that your opponent really has nothing they can do for the rest of the game. So boss's order is going to be really clutch for sure. 4 Marnies. Again, this deck, we don't really want to be discarding a lot of stuff. A lot of the cards are important, and we don't want to burn through our deck too quick. So Marnie's going to be a good way for us to find and to draw a lot of cards without really discarding or losing any cards in our deck. So Marnie makes a lot of sense. Also has really good hand disruption, which again is really good in a deck like this. So very smart to run 4 Marnies. Next up is Rosa. So Rosa is probably the most important supporter in this deck, or at least one of them. Rosa, if one of your Pokemon got knocked out next turn, then you can search your deck for a trainer, basic energy, and put them into your hand. So this means that, if your Snorlax got knocked out next turn, you can just play Rosa, find your Rare Candy, find your Turffield Stadium, and just go into your Decidueye guaranteed next turn if you do have a Rowlet on your bench. And there's plenty of different combos that you can do with Rosa. You can grab maybe like Scoop Up Net, maybe you can grab Telescopic Sight and Rare Candy, whatever it might be, whatever you need in terms of an energy. And a trainer card, then you can do it, right? And we do run 3 basic energies, so that's important to note. Also finds energy if you need it, very, very useful card in this deck for sure. Next up, we run 4 Sonia. Sonia is a card that people don't typically play a lot. Doesn't see a lot of play. It's a pretty niche card, but in this deck, it actually works out really well. So you search your deck for 2 basic Pokemon and up to 2 basic energy cards, reveal them, and then put them into your hand. So this can be really good to just find those Rowlets early game, get them onto your bench, find those basic energies that you'll need, throughout the game, and really get that board state set up early in the game, which is again going to be really good. I guess with this deck, most of the time you'd prefer to maybe, turn 1 going second or turn 2, play Sonia, get your Rowlets out on the board, and then after your Snorlax gets knocked out, because preferably you start with Snorlax, I'd imagine, then you play your Rosa and go directly into your Decidueye. So the flow for this deck and the flow chart is definitely very apparent, and definitely really good, consistent, which is really important for sure in a deck like this. So the supporter lineup I think is really good. I like it a lot in this deck for sure. Everything seems to make a lot of sense. Everything goes together really well, and I think that's really important when you're playing a deck for sure. So next up we have 1 Telescopic Sight. So this is a new inclusion, a new card from Vivid Voltage. Also really cool to see this in a Decidueye deck. Kind of a niche sort of item, but one that can actually be really clutch in a lot of matchups. So the attacks of this Pokemon that this card is attached to do 30 more damage to your opponent's benched V and GX Pokemon. This means that you can attach this to Decidueye. Not only are you doing 90 to the active, but you're doing 50 damage to 2 of your opponent's bench V or GX Pokemon. Let's say they have like a Dedenne, a couple Dedennes, or like a Dedenne and a Crobat, whatever it might be. Now you can spread 50 damage per turn onto 2 different bench Pokemon instead of just 20. And that damage is really going to add up, especially since, if your opponent can't damage you and he's really just trying to stall, then this really will speed things up and kind of make sure that eventually you will get those knockouts before the time expires, and can be really good to really eventually get the win, right? I think that this card is actually super, super important in this deck, and I think it's a really good inclusion for sure. Next up for energy, so of course we're running the new Aromatic Energy from Vivid Voltage. Kind of just makes it so you can't get poisoned or paralysis or paralyzed. Again, a really good inclusion in Decidueye, because a lot of decks that can't do damage to Decidueye, maybe they're going to try to poison Decidueye and just sort of try to knock it out eventually that way. not anymore. Now he has Aromatic Energy, makes it that much more consistent, makes it that much more safe to other types of knockouts that your opponent might try. Things like Poison, things like Burn, just they can't happen anymore with Aromatic Energy. Really makes this deck that much more bulletproof, which I think is just absolutely phenomenal. This card seems like it was made for this deck. But next we have for Capture Energies, we do have some color, one colorless and Decidueye's attack cost. So just being able to attach a Capture Energy to like your Rowlet or your Decidueye, whatever it might be at the time, just being able to grab another Rowlet while placing an energy is just really good. It just makes total sense to put that in this deck. We don't see any like weakness guard energy, and I don't think that's really necessary. Things like Blacephalon are going to have a really easy matchup, I think, against this deck, and it's just not really something worth teching for and putting that fire or that weakness guard energy into. You're going to lose to Blounce no matter what, in my opinion, and you're going to win most of the time against things like Centiskorch or like Reshiram and Charizard. What other fire decks are just not going to be able to attack Decidueye. So for that matter, weakness guard energy just doesn't seem to make much sense. So he runs 4 Capture Energies, and I think that's a really good idea. So we got the 4-4 lineup, and then just 3 basic grass energies. Of course, works well with Sonia, works well with Rosa and Ordinary Rod. It just makes sense, gives the deck a little bit more of a consistent energy flow to it. Making sure that you consistently do have energies to manually attach onto your Pokemon can be really good, and makes the deck that much more consistent. You've heard me say that word a lot throughout this video about this deck, but it's true. It's a really good list. It's really consistent, and it does what it needs to very often and very well, and I think that's important for a deck like this for sure, for most decks in general, but for this deck specifically, and I think that this list is really good. Again, it's just a really good meta call. Caquim had he was really smart to play this deck. I think hopefully people are going to probably start just sort of teching for Decidueye more in the future. It's won a bunch of tournaments actually the past week, and just really kind of popped back up in the meta. Once people forgot about it, it was like, well, I'm still here. I'm still winning tournaments now. You guys need to prepare for me, and you need to put cards in your deck to make sure that you can deal with me. And, I think that people eventually will, right? It's only going to be a matter of time before Decidueye wins so many tournaments, before people start preparing for it. But as long as people aren't preparing for it, it's a deck that's incredibly powerful, especially right now in our format dominated by GX and V Pokemon. So, yeah, man, that's the deck list. I do have a recording of the finals match. I might make that a separate video. I don't want to make this video too long, so I'll probably upload that soon. But that's going to be the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed this Decidueye list. Definitely go try it out if you're playing in Hexters or a Chill Series event coming up or LOS Weekly. Maybe try to play Decidueye and get some cheeky wins, or maybe kind of sneak into top cut bracket and get an easy run to finals. Can be a very cool deck to run. Also a really fun deck to run. So let me know, try it out, and comment below your opinions on this deck. Do you think that Decidueye will remain a very valid choice as far as decks go right now in this online meta, or do you think that people will really start to prepare for it in the next few weeks? But I'm very interested to know to hear what you guys think for sure. If you're watching this video and you're looking to play in an online tournament, just like the tournament that this deck won, then the Chill Series number 12 is coming up this Wednesday. Going to be a great tournament. Of course, we'll be making videos on it, making content on it. It's Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. It's anyone can play in it. So if you're looking to play in an online event and you're watching this video, definitely go check it out. Link to it will be down below. Next up, actually, I want to mention that myself and Zach Lesage are actually starting a new weekly podcast called The Yellhorn. In this podcast, we're talking about, various topics about me and Zach's, life throughout, what's going on with our lives, what are we doing recently, but mainly we're going to be covering the meta, the online meta for all of these online tournaments that are really, becoming more and more popular as time goes on. I think having a dedicated podcast to highlight these tournaments, highlight the results of these tournaments, and really discuss the online scene right now for the Pokemon trading card game is going to be really good. So that video is actually going to be out later tonight that I'm recording this, so it might be in the past. When you guys see this video, it probably will. But either way, definitely go check out that podcast. It's going to be really good. Zach, of course, Zach Lesage, or the Lone Blown, as you might know him. He is the Players Cup 2 champion, so we definitely talked about that a little bit on our first episode of the podcast, and it was a really good time. So if you guys are interested in podcasts, or you're interested in what me or Zach have to say, then go check that out for sure. But I'm going to wrap up the video here, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll see you guys soon, And yeah, thanks for watching.